Have you noticed how quiet real wealth has become? It's almost as if the truly rich have vanished, not because they lost their fortunes, but because they've chosen to disappear. Think about it. You don't see them on social media flashing cars or talking about mindset. They move silently, almost invisibly, while the loud ones fight for digital applause. But why? Why would someone with everything step out of sight? Maybe because real wealth isn't about showing power, it's about keeping it. Niccolo Machiavelli, in The Prince, warned that visibility is vulnerability. The moment you reveal your power, you invite envy, schemes, and decay. So perhaps the modern millionaires have learned what kings once knew, that survival demands subtlety. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow with $10 million. How long would it take before people begin to look at you differently? Not as you, but as a resource, an opportunity, a problem to solve. The weight of visibility transforms success into exposure. And that's when the quiet ones start vanishing. Maybe wealth has entered a new phase, one not measured by display but by distance. The richest people you'll never meet are those who mastered the art of being unseen. They've understood that in a world obsessed with attention, discretion has become the new luxury. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. If the rich are hiding, what does that say about us, the watchers? Are we addicted to visibility because we fear being forgotten? Or because we've confused being noticed with being valuable? As you listen, don't just think about money. Think about energy, influence, freedom, the currencies that truly define your life. Who controls them in your world? And what would change if, instead of showing everything, you began to guard them like a Machiavellian prince guarding his kingdom? If this thought stirs something in you, stay with me. Because by the end of this journey, you may realize that wealth was never about possession. It was always about power. And before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments, do you think the truly rich are hiding, or are they simply free? What if I told you that the modern dream of financial freedom might be one of the cleverest illusions ever sold? Imagine this. Millions chasing visibility, equating public admiration with success, while the truly free are quietly withdrawing from the stage. What if, instead of fighting to be seen, the real path to power was learning to disappear? Close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself living without the need to prove anything. No more pressure to post achievements, no hunger for validation, no subtle fear of being irrelevant. How would that feel? Light, perhaps. Quiet. Maybe even powerful. Because for the first time, your worth wouldn't depend on the eyes watching you. It would depend on your own awareness of what you've built. That's the paradox. Society teaches us to seek attention, yet every form of true mastery demands silence. The investor who compounds wealth doesn't tweet his trades. The writer who shapes culture doesn't brag about his drafts. The ruler who endures, as Machiavelli hinted, governs through restraint, not spectacle. The deeper your roots, the less you need to be seen. Now imagine a world where this understanding becomes your compass. You stop measuring success by recognition and start measuring it by autonomy. You learn to build quietly, to let your results speak in whispers rather than shouts. What would happen to your stress, to your creativity, to your relationships? This is not escapism, it's strategic invisibility. The disappearance of millionaires is not about wealth vanishing, it's about intelligence evolving. They've seen what public wealth invites: envy, imitation, attack. And so, they retreat into privacy not out of fear, but out of wisdom. The truth is, the richest life might not be the most visible, but the most deliberate. To disappear from the noise is to reclaim authorship of your story. You stop reacting to the world's demands and start shaping your own rhythm. So ask yourself, what would you gain by becoming less visible, but more intentional? What if the silence you fear is actually where your power begins to grow roots? Because maybe the hidden philosophy of wealth isn't about being known, it's about being untouchable. We've been told a comfortable lie, that the more visible you are, the more successful you must be. But history, and psychology, suggest the opposite. The louder someone needs to appear, the more fragile their position usually is. True strength, Machiavelli would say, doesn't shout. It observes, it calculates, it endures. Our culture celebrates the performer, not the strategist, the influencer over the thinker. Yet those who truly shape the world rarely seek applause. They understand something most people forget. Attention is a form of dependency. The moment you need it, you are no longer free. That's why so many people mistake exposure for empowerment, when in fact it's often just another kind of servitude. Think about it. Every photo, every post, every success update creates an invisible contract with the crowd. You must keep feeding it, or it forgets you. What begins as excitement turns into obligation. The public's gaze becomes your leash. And slowly you lose the very autonomy you were chasing. Machiavelli warned that the prince who depends on others for his power becomes their prisoner. The same applies today, only the throne is digital. The algorithm has replaced the court, but the logic remains. You serve those you try to impress. Here's the rupture, the disruptive insight. The pursuit of visibility might be the new poverty, because what you seek to prove, you secretly doubt. The truly wealthy don't need to announce themselves. Their presence moves through influence, not validation. So maybe the real question isn't, how can I become rich, but how can I stop performing? Because the moment you detach from the need to be seen, your energy shifts. You stop trading authenticity for approval. You start acting from power, not for attention. And this is where the old wisdom of Machiavelli meets modern psychology. Control begins where approval ends. When you no longer crave the gaze of others, you become unpredictable, self-directed, sovereign. So pause and ask yourself, are you building wealth, or are you building an audience? And more importantly, do you know the difference? Because the ones who vanish aren't running from the world, then they're escaping its addiction to spectacle. To understand why the wealthy vanish, we must return to Florence, the city of cunning princes and fragile republics, where Niccolò Machiavelli wrote his brutal masterpiece, The Prince. His lessons were not about greed or corruption, as modern clichés suggest, but about survival in a world driven by perception. Machiavelli's genius was in recognizing that power is never what it seems. He warned rulers to master the balance between appearance and reality. Everyone sees what you appear to be, he wrote. Few experience what you really are. And this line reveals the entire strategy of today's invisible elite. They've learned that to preserve freedom, one must control perception, not by overexposure, but by selective invisibility. Think about how this applies now. The average person broadcasts every aspect of their life, leaving no mystery, no leverage, no control. But the modern Machiavellian knows that mystery is power. When people can't fully read you, they can't fully manipulate you. The unseen move differently. They act with patience while others perform for attention. In the corporate world, this plays out like a chess match. The loud executives fade as quickly as they rise, while the quiet strategist, the one who speaks little but moves decisively, ends up shaping the entire board. The same dynamic exists in wealth. Those obsessed with being recognized for success rarely sustain it. Those who treat silence as strategy multiply their advantage quietly. Machiavelli believed that fortune favors those who control their image while never becoming its prisoner. That's why the disappearance of the new rich is not retreat. It's evolution. They've realized that to win in an age of surveillance and envy, privacy is not luxury, it's armor. But this principle is not just for millionaires. It's a philosophy anyone can apply. Control your narrative, limit your exposure. Learn to operate from the shadows when needed. Because every time you give away your privacy, you trade real influence for temporary applause. And perhaps this is the secret Machiavelli left behind. Those who master discretion do not fade, they endure. So ask yourself, are you shaping perception, or is perception shaping you? There's a quiet paradox at work in our time. We live in the wealthiest age in history, yet most people feel perpetually deprived. How is that possible? Because modern poverty isn't just a lack of money. It's a psychological condition created by comparison, distraction, and exposure. It's the invisible tax of visibility. Every time you open your phone, you step into an economy of envy. You don't pay with dollars, you pay with focus, attention, and peace. The algorithm doesn't want you rich, it wants you restless. It keeps you watching others' highlight reels, convincing you that your quiet progress is failure simply because it isn't public. That's the trap, believing that unseen effort has no value. But Machiavelli would have seen through it instantly. He knew that power doesn't belong to the loud or the visible. It belongs to the calculating, the patient, the self-contained, the ones who spend less time proving and more time positioning. The prince who parades his triumphs invites rebellion. The one who conceals them invites longevity. Modern poverty thrives on emotional dependency. When your sense of worth is tied to being noticed, you become controllable. The marketplace of attention feeds on this dependency. It trains you to confuse stimulation with success, reaction with relevance. You become wealthy in noise but bankrupt in depth. And this is why the silent millionaires vanish. They've learned that the ultimate luxury isn't money, it's mental sovereignty. They guard their attention the way kings once guarded gold. They understand that real wealth grows in stillness, in the ability to think, to act without performing. So ask yourself, who benefits when you stay constantly visible, constantly reachable, constantly performing? Because it's rarely you. The world profits from your distraction. Every moment spent proving your worth is a moment not spent building it. Here's the hidden dynamic. Poverty today isn't only economic, it's existential. It's the erosion of self through endless exposure. And the way out is not louder ambition, but deliberate withdrawal, the discipline of selective silence. The question then is not how to earn more, but how to leak less. Because in the end, you can't be rich if you keep giving yourself away. Let's be honest. We live in an age where silence feels like failure. If you're not posting, you're irrelevant. If you're not visible, you're assumed to be losing. But maybe the greatest rebellion left is to disappear, not in defeat, but in strategy. Because sometimes, the only way to win is to stop playing a rigged game. Here's a truth that cuts deep. Exposure is the new vulnerability. Every time you reveal what you're building, you invite noise into your process. Judgment, envy, distraction. The moment you let too many eyes in, your focus begins to fragment. What could have grown in peace now withers under pressure. The rich don't disappear because they fear attention. They disappear because they respect energy. Another truth. Wealth that must be flaunted is already fragile. Confidence that depends on witnesses is not confidence. It's performance. If you need others to see it, you don't really own it. Power is quiet. Discipline is invisible. Freedom makes no announcements. And one more, people don't envy your possessions. They envy your peace. That's why those who radiate calmness, control, and detachment become magnetic without even trying. They've stopped trying to impress and started trying to understand. Here's a line worth remembering. Attention is not the same as respect. Respect is earned in silence, attention is rented through noise. Machiavelli would have understood this instinctively. He'd remind you that rulers who constantly seek approval lose authority, while those who act with quiet precision build unshakable influence. Invisibility is not weakness, it's insulation. So maybe the next stage of evolution isn't more visibility, but strategic obscurity. The art of being known only by those who matter, of building things too complex and too personal for public consumption. If you want to rise, stop narrating your ascent. Work where no one claps. Build where no one praises. Let your results speak when your ego no longer needs to. And maybe one day you'll realize that your silence wasn't emptiness. It was power-gathering momentum. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a world addicted to noise is simply vanish. Here's the paradox that most people never grasp. To truly hold power, you must be willing to let go of recognition. The moment you need others to see your strength, you've already surrendered it. Visibility feeds the ego, but invisibility feeds control. And that's the paradox the new millionaires, the hidden ones, have mastered. In Machiavellian terms, power is not possession, it's perception. The visible king is always a target, but the shadow behind the throne moves unseen, untouchable, unblamed. That's the duality of modern wealth, to appear ordinary while controlling the extraordinary. The richest minds no longer crave the spotlight because they understand what it costs. Every bit of exposure chips away at autonomy. We live in a culture that glorifies transparency, but complete transparency is suicide for anyone seeking sovereignty. The paradox is this: the more open you become, the more predictable you are, and the more predictable you are, the easier you are to control. That's why discretion is not secrecy, it's strategy. Imagine two kinds of people. The first documents every move, hoping to inspire admiration. The second acts quietly, leaving no trace until the result is undeniable. The first gets applause, the second gets leverage. Which one do you think actually wins? Here's another layer of the paradox. Disappearance is not withdrawal, it's redirection. You stop feeding the world's gaze so you can feed your own mind. You stop reacting and you start designing. That's the unseen shift from dependence to dominance, from performer to strategist. Philosophically, this duality mirrors the Stoic and Machiavellian balance. Control yourself internally, influence externally. Speak little, act deeply. The louder your environment becomes, the more you benefit from stillness. Because silence, in a world that overshares, becomes its own form of power. So ask yourself, are you chasing exposure or engineering invisibility? Are you addicted to being known or focused on being unshakable? Because the richest paradox of all is this: the less the world knows about your moves, the more control you gain over their outcomes. And in that quiet space where no one is watching, true power, the kind that doesn't fade, begins to take root. There's a kind of wealth that can't be measured in numbers, the wealth of being untouchable. It's the quiet freedom of living without needing to explain yourself, defend your choices, or prove your worth. That's the real reward of disappearing. You stop performing and start living. Imagine waking up and realizing you owe nothing to anyone's expectations. You don't have to share your wins, justify your failures, or decorate your life for an invisible audience. You move with calm precision because your motivation no longer depends on applause. That's not isolation, that's liberation. We often mistake freedom for having more money, more status, more options. But real freedom, Machiavelli might argue, is having less to lose. When your identity is no longer tied to what others think of you, you become unpredictable, and therefore powerful. The fewer people who can emotionally manipulate you, the richer you become. The hidden millionaires have discovered this. They understand that peace, privacy, and time are the highest currencies. They've stopped trading their inner life for outer validation. And that's why when the rest of the world scrambles to stay seen, they quietly expand, financially, spiritually, strategically. Silence creates space. And in that space, intelligence grows. You start noticing patterns others miss because they're too busy speaking. You start building structures that last because they're not rushed by comparison. Your life begins to feel intentional again, measured, elegant, efficient. Here's the promise. If you begin to guard your privacy, your value will multiply. When you stop announcing your plans, you'll feel your focus sharpen. When you stop explaining your emotions, you'll feel your peace deepen. The less you share, the more you own yourself. So try this. For a week, don't announce what you're working on. Build in silence. Notice how your energy shifts. Notice how you move differently when you're no longer narrating every step. Because wealth isn't only about what you accumulate, it's about what you protect. And when you finally experience the stillness that comes from not needing to be seen, you'll understand. Disappearing wasn't losing visibility, it was gaining sovereignty. Every enduring system, from empires to fortunes, is built on one principle: control of perception. Machiavelli knew this 5 centuries ago, and psychology confirms it today. The visible world is only the surface. The real game is played in the invisible layers, in narrative, attention, and belief. The hidden millionaires understand this intuitively. They've stopped trying to dominate people and started mastering perception, beginning with their own. At its core, this is a philosophy of containment. Stoics called it temperance, Buddhists call it detachment, and modern psychology calls it emotional regulation. Machiavelli would call it prudence, the discipline of choosing when to reveal and when to conceal. To the untrained mind, this looks like mystery. To the wise, it's strategy. In the architecture of power, visibility is a liability. The more you expose, the less you control. That's why the powerful remain minimal in expression but maximal in action. They focus on leverage, not noise. They understand that influence isn't measured by how many people see you, but by how many move because of you. Modern science echoes this through the concept of cognitive scarcity. The brain has limited attention. What you give energy to expands. If you pour attention into being seen, you lose the bandwidth to actually build. The invisible elite do the opposite. They design systems that work even while they rest. They invest in structure, not status. This is the inner architecture of wealth. Philosophy, the principles that govern your choices. Psychology, the awareness that governs your emotions. Strategy, the design that governs your results. Without these, success collapses into spectacle. But when all three align, something rare happens. You no longer chase power. Power starts orbiting around you. So, the disappearance of the new rich is not retreat. It's refinement. It's the evolution from external conquest to internal mastery. They've realized that the truest empire is built not on land or currency, but on attention, and the ability to direct it deliberately. Because in the end, the strongest fortress isn't built of stone or steel. It's built of silence, intention, and self-command. So now you see, the disappearance of the millionaires was never about vanishing wealth. It was about rediscovered wisdom. They stepped back not to hide, but to see more clearly. They understood what most never do. That noise is the enemy of depth, and exposure the enemy of control. Machiavelli would smile at this age. He'd recognize the same patterns he warned princes about: the seduction of attention, the intoxication of flattery, the danger of visibility. He would say that most people lose power not because they're weak, but because they show too much of their strength. And perhaps that's the lesson for us, to stop leaking power through endless explanation. The new aristocracy is not made of titles or inheritance. It's built of people who have mastered privacy, purpose, and restraint. They create from silence, act from clarity, and move from choice, not from pressure. Their wealth isn't in their accounts, it's in their autonomy. But this philosophy isn't reserved for them. It belongs to anyone willing to reclaim their attention. You don't need millions to live with intention. You need focus, discipline, and the courage to step away from noise. The moment you stop performing, your inner architecture begins to rebuild itself. So here's your invitation. Experiment with invisibility. Withdraw, even slightly, from the theater of constant display. Build something without broadcasting it. Keep a project, a dream, a victory, entirely to yourself. Notice how your sense of power changes when the only validation you need is your own. Because in the end, the deepest form of wealth isn't what others can see, it's what no one can take. And if this message resonated with you, let's make this conversation grow. Leave a comment sharing what invisible wealth means to you. Does it sound like freedom, discipline, or peace? Your reflections help this space expand, a quiet community built not on noise, but on awareness. And if you found truth here, remember to like and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but for the journey ahead. Because the path we walk isn't toward visibility, it's toward mastery. In silence, real power waits.